gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm back with another video in collaboration with Chip Theory Games. This is a Gearloc guide to Nugget, and I'm really excited to show you Nugget because she's super fun to play both in co-op and solo. She's a very friendly character for beginners and experienced players alike, and we're going to talk about why that is. So the essence of Nugget is that she is proficient in battle, but she's also downright deadly when you motivate her with money. She is an expert finder of loot. She's a picker of locks. She has Slingstones, and she's just a really fun addition to any solo or co-op party. She's also capable of changing her stats and abilities for the duration of battle, and that's really amazing. We'll talk about how that works. And she can also hobble her enemies in a similar fashion. So you can do a lot of different stuff with Nugget, and I think that you as a player will enjoy that. So looking at Nugget, again, she is just sort of a middling difficulty, nothing too crazy for solo and co-op, and she is melee ranged. In her case, that means that she has some special attacks that are ranged, she has some that are melee. We're going to talk about when she can do which things. It also means that when you put her on the battle mat, you can put her in a ranged or a melee space, so you get to choose. And you can also choose to target any baddie on the mat anywhere as long as you have the right kind of attack power to do it. So in that vein, Nugget actually starts with one of her dice on her mat, and that is her Slingstone counter. So she has a consumable called Slingstones, and we'll talk about how to get more of those. It starts on here at 0, but once Nugget has some Slingstones, she's able to sling them around, which is why she is truly melee ranged. We should also talk about Nugget's innate ability very quickly. And her innate ability is called Treasure Seeker. Nugget is very aptly named because she does, in fact, enjoy her treasure. So what Treasure Seeker does for her is that whenever she gets loot as a reward after an encounter with enemies, she gets to draw an extra loot card. So she gets to look at 2 and then keep 1 and discard 1. So Nugget gets more choices. She gets to look at more loot, and so she ends up with better options over the course of the game. We'll talk about it more when we get to her innate +1 ability with the backup plan. But her innate +1 is called Treasure Hunter. And basically that means that when she gets loot as an encounter reward, she draws 2 loot cards. And instead of picking one to keep, she gets to keep both. So if you really enjoy your loot and you want to collect lots of loot cards, Nugget is your friend. So we've discussed how she starts with only 1 die on her mat. But she has 4 different professions. And then, of course, her consumables, which we'll discuss over here. So her professions are Gifted, Keymaster, Propellist, and Sword Dancer. And we're going to talk through each of these in order. We've also got her set up on the battle mat with a Troll Youngin because it's just not a very complex baddie. And if we need to demonstrate anything, she'll be over here hanging out with him. And as usual, we have everything out for Nugget. Her Gearloc mat, her dice, her reference sheet, and her chip. All of which is in a really glorious shade of purple. I don't want to bag on the colors of any of the other Gearlocs because they're all beautiful in their own way, but I'm super partial to Nugget's purple. I'm not even gonna lie. All right, so let's start by talking about Gifted. There are 3 skills in the Gifted profession. You have to start with Wildborn, and then you can progress to Lucky and Golden Touch, as you can see by these arrows. So we're just gonna talk through those in order. All right, so this is die number 1 for Nugget's first skill, which is called Wildborn. This symbol essentially means mislead, and the number on here is the baddie point value for the baddie that it can affect. So this die can only be rolled when the Gearlocs on the mat are outnumbered by baddies. So Nugget can't just roll this whenever, but it's very, very good in a pinch when you have too many baddies on the battle mat and you just don't know how you're going to deal with them all. So what Mislead allows you to do is it allows you as Nugget to take a baddie who has the stated point value or less. So this side would only let you remove a 1-point baddie. This one would let you remove any baddie that's worth 5 or fewer points. And you don't get to kill the baddie and they're not permanently gone, but you do get to take them off of the battle mat and put them in the baddie queue. Which means that they're temporarily out of your hair and they'll approach the mat again later, but it lets you cope with your numbers deficit for now. Do note that when a baddie leaves the battle mat and goes into the queue, they will re-enter the battle as if it was for the first time. So if you remove a baddie from the mat using this die that had a status effect or that had reduced HP, all of those things will basically disappear and the baddie will come back into battle at full health with no status effects. So be careful when you use this because you want to make sure you're using it strategically on an enemy where it's really going to matter. And then, of course, because it's too many bones, you do have a bones face. This one is special. As you can see, even though the background is red, you also have the inside of the bones showing up as red. This is a red bones result. And when you get one, what that means is that you must use it in your backup plan if you roll it. So a lot of dice with bones faces, you can kind of choose whether to put them in your backup plan. Maybe you just want to put it back in the skill slot and roll it again on a future turn. That's not going to happen if you get red bones. Red bones means the die has to go in your backup plan. And that is the essence of Wildborn. Use it when you are outnumbered and you need to get baddies out of your hair. Die number 2 is called Lucky, so let's take a good look at that one. I will note that if you want to read along with me, Lucky is on the back of Nugget's reference sheet, so you may want to look there and read along with because this die works in a really special way. In most cases, when you have a skill die, you roll it. But with Lucky, if you've trained this die, before battle, you actually get to choose which face you want facing up, which is super cool. And then you put it in an active slot. And then once it's in an active slot, so we could put it up here, every time I make a roll, as long as there are no bones in that roll, I get the benefit that's on the Lucky die. And what's even better than that is that when I get the reward, it does not exhaust. This can stay active for the entire battle if you want to. If you remove it on purpose or it gets removed, it does exhaust like a normal die, but you can reap this reward again and again and again if you're not rolling any bones. So let's have a closer look at what these rewards are. This is a side that'll do extra damage. So basically you add 1 to the total damage that you apply to your target on a given turn. This one is an extra bone, so you can add an extra bone to your backup plan every time you reap this reward. This die face allows you to recover, so essentially every time you roll without bones, you get to add an extra HP up to your full health. And this side offers extra defense, so basically you get to put a +1 defense die in another active slot every time you reap this particular die face reward. So again, Lucky does all of its work from an active slot on your Gearloc mat, and it is amazing because every time you have a good roll with no bones, you get to reap this reward again and again and again. So that's Lucky. Lucky indeed. And then our third die in the gifted track is called Golden Touch. Most of the Golden Touch die faces are red bones, which you do have to use in your backup plan. So if you decide to train this die and then you roll it, most of the time you're just going to get some bones that you have to put into your backup plan. However, you may decide that it's worth it because the success side is very successful indeed. This is a very special symbol and it indicates improved training. So what is improved training? As you'll know if you watched my Gearloc anatomy video, which is the very first one in the series, when you want to increase your attack or defense stat, you have to roll dice totaling your current attack or defense stat and hope that you don't roll any bones. If you do roll a bone, then you can't put that skill point there and you have to allot it somewhere else. If you have improved training, during a single training attempt, you can ignore 1 bone. So this die makes it much more likely, especially as your attack and defense numbers get higher and higher, that you will be successful in a training attempt. And therefore, it is super useful. So that is the gifted profession. And as you can see, Nugget's already got a lot of great stuff going on, and we've got multiple professions left to go. All right, so now let's talk about Nugget's second profession, which is Keymaster. There are 3 skills in this profession. The first one is Combat Proficiency, which is where we have to start because that's star. And then you can move on to Keen Eye or Locksmith, and we're going to talk about what those mean. Combat Proficiency, however, is a wonderful place to start. Let's talk about why. So, while this is a game of too many bones, and you can fail and get a bone, every other result on this die is awesome. So, basically what most faces will do is give you some sort of permanent effect that'll last throughout battle, and you put it in your active slot. So, this face basically allows you to regenerate health every turn. So, at the start of every turn for the remainder of the battle, you can get +1 health if you are missing any of your health. This one gives you +1 movement every turn for the duration of battle, and what's even better is this +1 costs you no dex. So you can use this +1 movement and not spend any of your valuable dex for the turn. This one lets you mod your defense dice, so basically you can alter your defense die by the number on the die. So for the duration of battle, every time I roll defense, I'll get an extra +1, and it doesn't cost me any dexterity to do that. This face does the same thing except for attack dice. So when I roll attack dice, I can add a +1 without spending any dex. And then this result in the active slot allows me to just act as though my dexterity stat were 1 higher. So I can use an extra dex every turn for the duration of battle. So combat proficiency is great because it just gives you so many potential options that are super helpful, and it just sits in your active slot and keeps helping you for the whole time. Once you've got this one, you can go in a couple of different directions. Keen Eye is kind of a more risky one, but it does have big rewards. The majority of die faces for this die are just red bones, which of course, again, once you roll them, mean you have to use them in your backup plan, and there is no escape. However, if you have a success, this die face is great because you get to draw 3 loot and then keep 1. So you get a guaranteed loot and you get some more choice as to what it is. Or you can roll a face that'll let you add a special loot encounter to your encounter stack. So there's an encounter called Ebonite Doorway, and if you have not completed it by the time you roll this die face, you get to add it to your encounter stack and hopefully encounter it during your game. So Keen Eye is just kind of an interesting way to get some extra loot. That is, after all, Nugget's thing. And then we have a die here that I personally really love called Locksmith. So between all these battles in Too Many Bones, you might have loot that you need to unlock. Trove loot is always extra good. It's also extra hard to get because there will be locks that you have to pick during your downtime in order to get at that sweet, sweet loot. In order to successfully unlock Trove loot, you have to pick not only one lock, but a series of locks, and you have to roll dice in order to make that happen. So most of these die faces are going to give you extra numbers that you can add onto a lockpicking attempt. So if you need 3 force and you only got 1, this will let you add extra to get what you needed. This die face is special because it'll let you completely bypass one of the locks that you're trying to deal with on your loot. But if you get really lucky, there's also a die face that will completely unlock a piece of loot for you without you having to do all the lockpicking attempts. So if you want to see if you can bypass a lock free, this one is great. Locksmith is a super fun die to have. Down here we have the Propellist profession, and there's 2 places you can start. You can start with Tinkered Bolo, or you can start with Longblade, and we're going to talk about what each of those would be, and then we'll talk about Nugget's Dagger, which both of these ultimately lead to. Tinkered Bolo is fun because it's kind of like the opposite of Nugget's combat proficiency die. Whereas combat proficiency lets Nugget increase her stats throughout the entire battle, this one decreases an enemy's stats throughout the entire battle. So this die face forces an enemy to move less. This one also inhibits movement. This one will decrease an enemy's defense rolls. This face will decrease an enemy's attack rolls. And while most of the faces will just impede movement, all of these faces are great and there are no bones. So use this on your target to hobble them in one way or another. Tinkered Bolo is pretty great for that. You could also choose to come down here and get Longblade. So your Longblade is great. All of its results are longsword results, and they allow you to deal the number of damage printed on the die to your target, and then you put the die back in its skill slot. It is not exhausted when used. So essentially, whenever you want to do some damage and you've got a dex, you can roll this against your target. It will do the amount of damage printed on the dice. There are no bones on here, so you're always going to do something, and then you put it back here on your actual Gearloc mat to roll again. It never exhausts, so it's just access to extra damage again and again and again, which is fabulous. So next up we have Nugget's Dagger, and this die is awesome. Let's take a look. So as with most dice in Too Many Bones, there is a bones face, so it's not successful every time, but every side other than the bone side is going to have a bleed symbol. Bleed is great because basically it causes bleeding damage. You place a bleed status effect die on your target after rolling this, and it's going to cause them to take 1 true damage at the start of every single turn for the duration of battle. And this is amazing because if you have enemies that have skills that prevent you from doing too much damage to them, or that force you to do true damage, or that cut down on your attack somehow, this is a great way to wear them down. I really enjoy being able to place a bleed effect. And this die has some other surprises in store because some of the sides have more than just the bleed. They also have a number that tells you how much damage is done at the time of resolving the die, and then you put the bleed effect on. So some faces will let you do 1 damage to your target at the time of resolving the die. This one will let you do 2 damage at the time of resolving the die, plus the bleed effect. And even if you get just regular bleed, it's pretty great. So, Nugget's Dagger, highly recommend trying it out. And then we have one more profession to talk about for Nugget, and that is her sword dancer profession, which is along the bottom here. You have to start with dash, and then you work your way through tumble, sidestep, and déjà vu. Dash is exactly what it looks like. It adds to Nugget's movement, and she gets additional dex-free movement for the duration of battle if you roll this and put it in an active slot. Of course, you can choose to remove it later, and then it will exhaust. Most sides of this die will just give you 2 extra movements, which is great, but you can also roll a bone because it happens. So, dash. The die you want for permanent extra movement. Then we are going to move on to tumble and talk about what that is. Tumble is interesting because this is an immediate use die that you use to bump yourself up the initiative track. So if Nugget is a little lower on initiative and you want to change the tempo of battle, then this is the die for you. Nugget is able to move up the initiative track according to the number of spaces that are printed on this die. So 7's quite a lot. And actually all of the die faces say this. So she'll always move up 7, unless of course you fail your roll, in which case you'll get one of these 2 bones faces, which, I mean, those also are not so bad. That's a lot for your backup. Before we continue on, there's one more thing I want to emphasize about the tumble die, and that's that while it's listed as a die that you use immediately, the effect of it doesn't actually trigger until the end of the round. So when you roll this one, it does exhaust, but then after the full round has taken place and everybody has gone, then at the beginning of the next round, you get to choose how high up the initiative meter you want to go, up to 7 spots. So, tumble. Use it when you want to move up the initiative track. The next die in this profession is sidestep, which I particularly love because this one goes in your active slot and it's called parry. And basically what happens with parry is that when a baddie attacks or uses a skill, damage and effects applied to you are avoided. Sadly, you don't always get to choose when to use it, so the moment you do have to parry, this die will exhaust. It doesn't stay in your active slot for the duration of battle, but it's very cool while it's there. So use parry for a get out of attack free, and then it will exhaust. And then this last one is pretty awesome. It's called Déjà Vu. This one is tricky because most of the sides are bones, but a couple of them are this lovely Déjà Vu symbol. And what this allows you to do when you roll the die is immediately take an extra turn after you finish your current turn. So it's amazing because you get to essentially go twice in a row, which is really going to be helpful if you are in a tight situation and need to get things going in your favor. So Déjà Vu. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's unsettling for your enemies, very exciting for you. All right, so now let's talk about Nugget's consumables, and that's going to lead us to talking about her Slingstones and kind of the ways in which her attacks work. So this is actually a pretty key part of the video. Make sure that you're here with me. So this first consumable is called a Scrambler. This one's kind of neat because it helps with your lock picking. Basically, you can roll this during battle, put it in a lock slot, and then on your next lock picking attempt, you can use it as an extra intuition die. Each of these sides gives you a bonus to your lock picking, just like the intuition die in the lockpicking game for Too Many Bones. This next one is called Gem Decoy, and this is fun because essentially baddies like gems too, and the Gem Decoy lets you attract a baddie by dropping a fake gem there. So if you roll this die, then you can put it out on the mat adjacent to a baddie with the number of points printed or fewer. So this one would attract a 5-point or fewer baddie, this one only a 1 point. But essentially you put it in the spot next to them on the battle mat, and you make sure that it's a spot that's not great for them, obviously. And then they are greedy and they are lured to the spot where you can then get them for whatever purposes. It can get them off of your back, or it can make them do something that's to your tactical advantage. But as long as you put a Gem Decoy in an empty space adjacent to a baddie with the right point value, it can help lure them around and away from you, which is pretty great. And then here we have Slingstones. This is Nugget's most important consumable because it's really the core of her melee ranged identity. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, Nugget is a melee ranged character. You can start her in a melee or a ranged spot on the battle mat, but the kind of weapon she is using determines her attacks. So Nugget can target any baddie on the battle mat. So she can target this troll youngin here. She could target this troll youngin if he's over here, which makes things like her tinkered Bolo and her Longblade very useful in multiple situations. However, Nugget's attack dice and whether they can be melee or ranged is determined by how many Slingstones Nugget has. So in a normal melee attack, Nugget will roll her attack dice as normal. So she can just roll 2 attack dice against this troll and attack him melee style. So with Slingstones, if Nugget has enough of them, she has the option to designate her attack dice as ranged attacks using her Slingstones. So if my Slingstone counter is set to 1, I can use one of my attack dice to target this troll and then spend the Slingstone to use the damage on that attack die as a ranged attack as opposed to a melee one. If Nugget does not have any Slingstones, then she can't use her attack dice that way. So you want to be making sure that you're getting Slingstones regularly and monitoring how many you have, because they really make her have good variability in gameplay, and it gives her just such an extra oomph in battle. So when Nugget is listed as melee ranged, this game really means it, but you have to do special things in order to make sure that she is ranged. And again, this is specifically for your attack dice. If you just use your attack dice normally, they're going to be melee, and your target needs to be an adjacent target. If you're going to use your Slingstones, then that would be a way to use your attack dice by designating them as Slingstones to attack a target at range. Every other die that does a targeting effect could target any baddie anywhere on the board. So everything that you do with Nugget depends on where her target is and what you're trying to achieve. So keep that in mind as you're playing Nugget. Learning how to use her at her full range, makes her a super powerful and interesting character in ways that other Gearlocs aren't. All right, so now that we've talked about Slingstones, what's the main way to increase them? You can get loot for consumables, but the main way to do that is in the backup plan. So let's talk about Nugget's backup plan, then her starter build, and then it'll be a wrap for this guide. All right, so let's talk Nugget's backup plan, which is a very fine backup plan indeed. For 1 bone, you can collect stones and increase her Slingstones die by 1. So if you want Slingstones, the backup plan allows you to get them right away. You kind of want to roll bones as Nugget because the Slingstones are awesome. For 2 bones, you can revitalize, and that heals Nugget for 2 HP, so she's also got a way to heal herself. This is one of the things that makes her really good for solo. She has multiple ways to access more HP if things get a little gnarly. Plus, she has the ability to mess with the initiative meter, either by using Tumble and moving herself up the meter, or by moving enemies off of the mat entirely, as with Wildborn. For 3 bones, you can't do anything, but that's okay, because for 4 bones, you can use Disable. So when you put a Disable status effect on a unit, and you can do this for one that has 5 baddie points or less, then the unit's skills are suspended and that lasts the entire battle. So what that means is that when you disable an enemy, they can't use any of their annoying skills on you, which is super good because a lot of the baddies that you will encounter in Too Many Bones have skills that make your life seriously difficult. So having the ability to disable them is amazing. And then here we have the coup de grace. So coup de grace and Tumble work in pretty similar ways. Basically, when you're going to jump up the initiative meter, you do so at the end of the round. Like the effect actually kicks in at the end of the round. So when you roll this one, you use it immediately, the effect will kick in at the end of the round, and Nugget can move up the initiative meter. The coup de grace does the same thing. At the end of the round, when you use it, you place Nugget on the top spot of the initiative meter. So she has multiple ways of getting herself up to the top of the initiative meter, one of which is in her backup plan, one of which is in her dice. And then, of course, if you get 6 bones, you upgrade to an 8+1 and get double the loot forever, which is a pretty fantastic result. So let's talk about Nugget's beginner build strat very quickly, and then that will be Nugget. So here on the beginner build strat, we see Chip Theory just laying it out for us. Nugget doesn't have a lot of survivability, so your first priority is to get her some more HP. Then you're going to want to add some stats to defense, dexterity, and attack. And then after that, you look at what tyrant she's facing and think about what you might add in anticipation of that final battle. For skills, we have her Longblade and her Tinkered Bolo. Those are absolutely fantastic to have. You should prioritize getting them first, even though a lot of the other ones are quite cool. And then you can start messing around with her Sword Dancer profession. If you like some loot, especially some trove loot, you're going to want to do Keen Eye. If you do want to go the loot route, you might want to add it early on to give you more turns where Nugget can take advantage of that ability. And that just about sums up Nugget. She's really fun to play because she's resourceful. She has really amazing in-combat abilities. She's melee and ranged. She is essentially a character that can do it all. So if you want to try it all, she's a great one to play. So I hope that you take Nugget out for a spin in your next game of Too Many Bones and that you enjoy it very much. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for another Gearloc guide, and most of all, happy gaming.